Good evening, listeners. How y'all feeling tonight? After hearing about all the foundational talk online and hearing every group lay claim to the United States that I was time to time travel a little, back before TikTok, before Motown, before photographs, we're going to talk about some of the oldest groups of European stock that poured into this place that would become the United States, what they brought, what they broke, what they built, and how their fingerprints still sit on the light switch you flick every morning. Now, here's ground rule number 1. When we talk about the making of America, we're not pretending Europe did it alone. This country is a gumbo. The bedrock was indigenous nations who were here since time top-loaded the save file. The muscle and genius of millions of Africans, free and enslaved, powered and shaped everything. Later waves from Asia, the Caribbean, Latin America, the Middle East, all of them remixed the track. But tonight we've got a specific assignment. Zoom in on those early European streams, mostly 1500s to early 1800s, the folks who showed up with old world luggage and had to learn fast that the new world don't read the same manual. So boom, let's get into it. Let's start with the headliners, the English. They were all over the eastern seaboard, Jamestown in 1607, Plymouth in 1620, Massachusetts Bay in 1630, on down through Virginia and the Carolinas. If you've ever sat through a town meeting where everybody talks for 2 hours about where to put the stop sign, congratulations, you've met the English legacy. They carried common law, which runs on precedent. What did we do last time this mess happened? They brought juries, elected assemblies, and a grievance habit so strong it became a political philosophy. In New England they practiced congregational self-rule, churches running themselves, towns managing schools, roads, the poor. That's where the American town meeting, a kind of civic open mic, was born. In the Chesapeake, English planters grew tobacco, set up county courts, and created a different rhythm. Fewer towns, more plantations, more hierarchy. 2 English Americas, side by side. One reading sermons and voting in clusters, the other counting crops and power by rivers and acres. English culture standardized the language that would become our lingua franca and supplied a lot of the software for our politics. Rights talk, property law, due process, freedom of the press. Ask John Peter Zenger later. He'll be here for the encore. And with the English came the shadow. Indentured servitude first, then the codification of racial chattel slavery, especially in the South. That legal machine would haunt us for centuries, and breaking it would take a war and a movement, and still work left to do. But the English also planted schools early, Harvard in 1636, and a reading culture so aggressive that by the 1700s New England farmers were debating theology and politics like it was sports radio. From the courtroom to the classroom, a lot of America's default settings speak with an English accent. Number 2 is the Dutch. Merchants with receipts, tolerance with training wheels slide up the coast to New Netherland, what becomes New York and New Jersey. The Dutch were there in the 1600s building New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island, and they ran it like a startup with canals. Trade first, details later. Their impact? Commercial muscle and urban DNA. The grid, the wharf, the warehouse, the idea that if it moves we can sell it. Dutch law protected private property. Dutch society practiced a kind of pluralism, not kumbaya, but you can live here and worship weird if the ledgers add up. The Dutch also injected the culture of stock exchanges, insurance, and banking. When the English took over in 1664, they kept the cash habits. That's why New York grows into Wall Street and not a salt marsh with opinions. The Dutch left place names, Harlem from Harlem, Brooklyn from Brooklyn, the Staten in Staten Island. They left a default setting of cosmopolitan hustle, a city where different languages bump shoulders and nobody is impressed because the rent is due on the first. Number 3, the Swedes and Finns. Little colony, big log cabin energy. Don't sleep on New Sweden along the Delaware River, 1638 to 1655. A small splash, yes, but they brought the log cabin, a cheap, flexible house type that became frontier fashion from Pennsylvania to Kentucky. Swedes and forest Finns had the woodworking and the patience. America had trees for days. That cabin, one room, fireplace, a door that actually closes on wolves, becomes the emoji for American frontier life. Number 4. The Germans. Barns, bread, and a suspicion of kings. Germans came heavy in the 1700s, Palatines, Mennonites, Moravians, Lutherans, and Reformed, landing mostly in Pennsylvania, then hiking south along the Great Wagon Road into the Shenandoah and Carolina backcountry. The English called them the Pennsylvania Dutch, from Deutsch. What did they bring? Farms that work, barns that don't fall, bread you can brag about, and crafts. Gunsmithing in Lancaster, ironworks in the forests, furniture that outlives your grandkids. They also brought a pluralist religion map and a suspicion of centralized authority. Many were refugees from war and taxes. They liked their God close and their princes far. They helped normalize freedom of conscience. Pennsylvania's ethnic stew, English Quakers, Germans, Scots-Irish, forces the colonies to learn toleration or collapse into noise. Linguistically, Germans peppered American English with words and ways. Sauerkraut, Strauss, Zeitgeist, and that tractor beam work ethic that feeds the cities. Politically, many German Americans supported independence, some as patriots in blue and buff, some as pacifists refusing to fight but innovating agriculture so well the army wanted their food. Now the Scots-Irish, people of Scottish ancestry who'd spent generations in Ulster, Northern Ireland, and sailed to America by the hundreds of thousands in the 1700s. You want Appalachian backbone? That's their soundtrack. They settled the backcountry, western Pennsylvania, Virginia's Shenandoah, the Carolina Piedmont, into Tennessee and Kentucky. Areas with rocky soil and a shortage of sheriffs. Their cultural export list is loud. Presbyterian meeting houses, camp meeting revivals, log schools, whiskey, and fiddle tunes that morph into bluegrass and country music. Politically, they nurtured a liberty-first temperament, deeply suspicious of taxes without a handshake and a reason. See the Whiskey Rebellion, 1790s. During the Revolution, they stocked the militias that made frontiers too hot for the redcoats. They were also complicated. Some fought on the Loyalist side. Many later became slaveholders in the upland South. Some became early abolitionists. Frontier life, like people, contains multitudes. From Scotland proper came teachers, printers, and theologians. A disproportionate number of the early college presidents had Scottish names and Enlightenment ideas. The Scottish common sense philosophy, plain language reason, moral sense, don't overcomplicate, spread through American classrooms like a well-aimed chalk eraser. The Welsh brought nonconformist Christianity, choral traditions, and later, in the 19th century, coal mining skills that powered Pennsylvania. But even earlier you find Welsh land companies plotting settlements and naming rivers after home. Their imprint lives in place names and the choir loft. The French. Huguenot craft and Cajun spice. Early French impact comes in two streams. One is Huguenots, French Protestants fleeing persecution, who landed in New York, South Carolina, and Virginia. They poured into textiles, silverwork, printing, and urban trades. Check old American city directories. You'll see French surnames tinkering with art and commerce. The other stream is French from New France, Canada, and Louisiana. When geopolitics blows hard, people move south. Acadians expelled from Nova Scotia become Cajuns in Louisiana, bringing rice cultivation, pirogues, and a cuisine that will make you miss your flight. French legal traditions in Louisiana left us a civil law system in that state that still thinks in code articles rather than casebooks. And the French alliance in the Revolution? Without it, the Americans would have been a very earnest letter to the king. The Spanish. The Spanish were in North America long before there was an English colony to send a postcard home. St. Augustine, Florida, starts in 1565. The Spanish built missions, presidios, and ranching economies across Florida, New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, California, introducing horses and cattle culture that the American West later branded as cowboy. Spanish engineers and priests planted towns along water and trade lines. Their land grants and acequia, irrigation ditch, systems trained the Southwest how to drink. Their place names drape half the map. Los Angeles, San Antonio, Santa Fe. And their legal ideas, community property, water rights, the rancho, still structure Western life. The Spanish crown also wrestled with the morality of empire, however imperfectly, producing debates about indigenous rights that became seeds for later arguments about citizenship and personhood. The Portuguese. Pilots behind the curtain. No big Portuguese colony on the mainland, but their navigators and cartographers shaped Atlantic routes, and Portuguese seafaring culture bled into early American whaling and trade. In the 1700s and 1800s, Azorian Portuguese settled in New England's maritime towns, carrying with them skills that kept New Bedford and Nantucket busy harpooning fate. Number 10. The Jews of early America. They were merchants, printers, and civic founders. They had small numbers, but left a big footprint. Sephardic Jews from Iberia and the Caribbean set up synagogues in Newport, New York, Charleston, and Philadelphia. They helped knit Atlantic trade, pioneered insurance and finance, and advocated for religious liberty clauses that later Americans would rely on. When Washington wrote to the Hebrew congregation at Newport promising a country that gives to bigotry no sanction, he answered a community already here, already contributing. The Irish Catholics arrived around the late 1700s to early 1800s. They're not oldest in the colonial sense, but the early Irish Catholic arrivals, before the mid-century famine wave, brought a militant equality streak and a deep bench of labor. They helped build canals and roads, served in militias, and challenged Protestant establishments to expand the definition of American. Their priests built schools, their workers organized, their voters changed city politics. Let's take a step back from the roll call and talk impact, because culture isn't just passport stamps, it's habits that scale. 1. Governance. We talk it out, then we write it down. English common law met Dutch commercial practice, German village governance, and Scottish Enlightenment logic, and we got a civic style that's part courtroom drama, part town hall, part ledger sheet. Localism, county courts in the South, town meetings in New England, boroughs in the Mid-Atlantic, trained people to expect government to be present but not all-powerful. That expectation made it thinkable to throw off a king and then spend 2 centuries arguing about how much power to return to the new one in a blue suit. Religion. From established churches to pluralist noise. New England Congregationalists, Virginia Anglicans, Pennsylvania Quakers, German Mennonites and Lutherans, Scots-Irish Presbyterians, Dutch Reformed, French Huguenots, Sephardic Jews. Pack them into 13 colonies and you either start a war of altars or invent a First Amendment. America chose doors open. Revival movements, the Great Awakenings, borrowed Scots-Irish fire, German pietist warmth, black church music, and turned faith into something portable and populous. The economy. Farms, ships, workshops, and ideas. Dutch credit and English law financed ports. German and Swedish tools made barns that could winter. Scots-Irish cleared mountains. Spanish cattle culture made the West ride. French traders stitched river networks. Jewish merchants coordinated Atlantic risk. The result, a mixed economy early on, agriculture, crafts, maritime trade, small manufacturing, that could pivot to industrial takeoff by the 1800s. The habit of self-improvement, print culture, almanacs, schools, meant innovations didn't have to come from a lord's laboratory. They could come from a tinkerer with a river and a deadly, culture. The soundtrack and the stories. The English wrote pamphlets and plays. The Germans farmed and sang in harmony. The Scots-Irish fiddled and told tall tales by the fire that later show up in American humor and country music. The French seasoned food and law. The Spanish named the sunsets and taught horses to dance. The Jews of Charleston and New York put the word liberty in the same sentence as minority rights, a sentence America keeps rewriting. Later, all of those strains met the genius of African American rhythm, indigenous story, and immigrant reinvention and gave us jazz, blues, gospel, country, hip-hop, the whole juke box. The contradictions. Freedom rhetoric with shackles on the ground. These same groups, especially the English planters and Scots-Irish and later the Irish, participated in and benefited from a system that enslaved Africans and seized indigenous land. Some resisted and spoke against it. Many didn't. The growth they fueled came with wounds they helped cause. To talk impact honestly is to admit both, the town meeting and the slave auction, the schoolhouse and the stolen field. America's greatness and its grief often share the same last name. By the 1760s and 1770s, those habits collided with imperial missteps. The English bring the vocabulary of rights, the Scots sharpen it with Enlightenment logic, the Dutch supply credit and a model of commercial republic, Germans and Scots-Irish fill the militias, French ships and money seal the deal. When Jefferson writes about unalienable rights, he's channeling English law and Scottish philosophy. When Washington keeps the army fed, he leans on Pennsylvania German farmers and Jewish merchants. When New York counts customs, the Dutch ghost in the ledger nods. The Constitution that follows has English bones, common law, bicameralism, Dutch nerve, commerce, Scottish brains, checks and balances, and German/Swiss nerves about central power. And yes, right there in the same parchment, clauses that compromise with slavery. From the jump, America sets a mission it takes generations to live up to, and those early European streams are part of both the courage and the contradiction. After independence, the engine keeps remixing. In the early Republic, Scottish teachers and German printers spread literacy. Irish and Scots-Irish push roads and canals west. Spanish land systems and French civil law shape the Southwest and Louisiana Purchase. Dutch finance matures into Wall Street. The log cabin becomes a campaign prop, born humble, made good, thanks to those Swedes and Finns who imported practical houses and the Germans and Scots-Irish who multiplied them. The frontier myth, self-reliant, skeptical of distant power, owes more to Ulster and the Rhineland than many realize. Meanwhile, cuisine gets busy. Dutch donuts, German scrapple, Irish stews, Cajun spice, Jewish bagels and lox, Spanish adobo in the far west. These are not just foods, they're memory machines. And alongside those plates, a growing chorus saying the words, "We the people" have to mean more people. Abolitionists, women's rights advocates, free black communities, religious minorities, all using the language and structures these early Europeans helped lay down, sometimes to challenge the very men who laid them down. If you listen close, you can hear those early accents in today's arguments. When a small town fights a zoning board, that's the town meeting spirit. When a city dreams bigger ports and taller banks, that's the Dutch whisper. When a farmer builds a barn you could hold a dance in, German hands are in the blueprint. When a fiddler tears up a porch and a choir nails a harmony, Scots-Irish and Welsh in the throat. When a Louisiana courthouse talks about usufruct and civil codes, French law clears its throat. When a rancher talks water and land, Spanish grooves line the ditch. When a synagogue opens its doors and a president promises, to bigotry no sanction, that's the early Jewish presence echoing forward. And when America debates how to square liberty with equality, how to grow an economy without crushing the people who make it run, how to expand the we in we the people, we are living with the tools, the tunes, and the tensions these groups helped hand us. Look, the oldest European stocks did not arrive as heroes or villains. They arrived as humans with seeds and sins. They planted schools and fences. They opened ports and wounds. They wrote constitutions and codified chains. The truth is big enough to hold all of it. What's our job? To keep the good, self-government, pluralism, law that checks power, education for ordinary people, the belief that you can fix what you break, and to refuse the old poisons, racial hierarchy, dispossession, the myth that freedom is for some and order is for others. If we do that, we honor not the tribe or the flag of any old country, but the best version of the country they helped start here. And you know what? The soul of Oman knows this story and how it is more important to understand how diversity and tolerance of different peoples is what allowed America to become great. Because everything currently great about American culture, jazz, soul, gospel, hip-hop, the long arc of black creativity, grew inside and against those structures. The diverse makeup that founded this country is proof that a nation can take all those rivers, English law, Dutch finance, German farms, Scots-Irish grit, French codes, Spanish maps, Jewish letters, and still be incomplete until the beat drops from Harlem, from the Delta, from the islands, from everywhere, and says, "Now this is the United States."